In today's video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to create an AI-powered chat application using the power of Flutter and Google's Gemini API. We're going to be building an application that's going to allow us to interact with the Gemini API with either just text or an image, and we can ask questions in both formats. Our application will provide us with the ability to ask the chatbot any type of questions. For example, how can I learn Flutter? And then as soon as we send our query to the actual API, it's going to reply to us with a streaming response, and I'm going to show you how you can stream the response to the user like it's being shown on the screen. Besides this, we'll also take a look at how we can have image-based chat with the actual Gemini API. So for example, if I send this image to the Gemini API and say, describe this picture, you're going to see that the Gemini API is going to analyze the picture that we've provided and then tell me the answer to my query, which in this case, it correctly identifies the picture as a beautiful harbor in Monaco. So to get started, the first thing that I'd like to let you know is that links to all of the resources that I mentioned within this video, as well as a link to the source code, can be found in the description below. So feel free to take a look at it if you're confused at any point. With that done, let's take a look at the dependencies that we'll be using to build this project, and then we'll move on to the coding part. So in total, we're going to be using 3 different packages from pub.dev. The first is going to be Flutter_Gemini package, and this package will make it very easy for us to communicate with the Gemini API. So just copy this package, come to the pubspec.yaml file, and paste this under the dependency section like so. Besides this, we're going to be using the image picker package, and this is basically going to allow us to access our device's gallery and then pick images from there. And finally, we'll be using dash_chat_2, which is an awesome complete chat UI that's going to make it very easy for us to build this chat interface within our Flutter application. So let's copy that, come back, paste it in, and that's pretty much all we had to do. So while Flutter does its magic, what we can do is actually get the API key that will be required to initialize our actual Gemini package. So to do that, what you can do is head on over to the pub.dev page for Flutter_Gemini, and here you can scroll down to the point where it says set up your API key, as you can see here. And then here you're going to be provided a link on which you can click, and it's going to take you to a new website that's ai.google.dev, and here you can apply to get an API key for interacting with Google Gemini. Before we actually take a look at how we can get the actual API key, let's actually take at the pricing of this API. So Google has very generously allowed us to have a free tier when we're working with the Gemini API, and basically it's going to be free, unlimited requests. The only caveat is that we're going to be limited to 60 requests per minute on the API key that we have. If we want to do more than 60 requests per minute, then we'll have to go onto a pay-as-you-go plan. So now that we have a good understanding of the pricing, let's come back to the ai.google.dev page, click on Get API Key in Google AI Studio, and it's basically going to take you to the AI Studio, and there you'll be able to get an API key. So to get an API key, all you'll do is come to the left-hand navigation bar. Here you're going to click on Get API Key, then you're going to click on Create API Key, and then you're basically going to search for a Google Cloud project like so, generate API key in existing project like so, and that's basically going to generate the API key for you. And then once you've copied your API key, just minimize the browser, come back to the lib folder. Here I'm going to create a new file under lib. I'm going to call this const.dart. Then what I'm going to do is basically say that I'm going to have a const string. It's going to be called the Gemini_API_key, and I'm going to set this equal to the API key that I was provided, and do command save, and that's pretty much all we had to do. So now with this then, we can come to our main.dart file, and here in the main function, I can basically initialize my Gemini package. So to do that, do Gemini dot, and this class is going to come from the Flutter_Gemini package in it, and then the API key to this function is going to be the Gemini API key that we had defined in our const.dart file. So now that this is done, that's pretty much all I'm going to be doing before proceeding onwards with coding. Before that, I'd just like to test the application, make sure that it's working as intended. So I'll start debugging this application, and once the application is running on the simulator, then I will resume the video. If you get an error while building the application which says multi-deck support is required, what you can do is come to the Android folder, then come to app, build.gradle, and then here what you can do is scroll down to the bottom where you see the minimum SDK version, and here you can change the minimum SDK version to 21 like so, and do command save. With this, you can start the debugging process again, and hopefully this should fix the multi-decks issue for you, and you should be able to run your application on the simulator. So now that the application is actually running on the simulator, we can be confident that the actual configuration process was done correctly, and now we can move on to the coding part. So to get started with coding, I've created a stateful widget class called homepage, for which I have a build function that just for now returns a scaffold, and we're going to be implementing everything from scratch. For the scaffold, the first thing that I'm going to be doing is basically setting the app bar property just to make our app look a bit nicer, and it says Gemini chat in the app bar now. And now we can move to the body. So I'm going to set the body property to be a call to a function called build UI, like so. And now that this is done, I will basically define this function underscore build UI. And then within this function, all I'll do is say that I'm going to return a dash chat widget instance, like so. And this class is going to come from our dash chat package. So now that this is done, we basically need to give this dash chat object 3 different parameters: the current user, what happens when we send a message, and the messages that it needs to display. So we'll take a look at these one step at a time. So the current user is basically the user that it's going to think of as the user that is logged onto the device, or is the user that's sending the messages. And dash chat is basically going to use this to differentiate between the messages that the current user sends and the messages that are received from other users. So to fix this, what I'm going to be doing is coming to the top, and here I'm going to be creating a chat user variable, and I'm going to call this current user, like so. And then I'm basically going to be setting that equal to chat user, and then I'm going to set the ID to be 0, and the name here could be whatever you'd like. So what I'm going to do is say that the first name is going to be user. And since we're going to be interacting with our Gemini API, I'm also going to create a user for that, so that we can differentiate between the messages that are shown, whether they're from the current user or from the Gemini API. And I'm going to call this Gemini user. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to set that to a new instance of chat user. The ID is going to be the 1. The first name is going to be Gemini. And then I'm also going to set the profile image URL on this. So I'm just going to copy and paste that in. And this is basically going to help us display an image as an avatar for the messages that we get from Gemini user. So now that we have the current user and the Gemini user defined, what I can do is come down to the dash chat object and set the current user to current user. Then we can define what happens when onSend is called, and I'll explain to you what onSend is. But for now, just do this: create a function that doesn't return anything, call it send message, and then it's basically going to take in a chat message. I'm going to call this chat message, and then open up the function's body, and then set the onSend to be send message, like so. So whenever onSend is called, we'll basically run our send message function and pass the chat message to it. And finally, for the messages list, what this basically means is the actual messages that are going to be displayed on the screen once we have some to display. So for now, what we'll do is that we'll create a list which is going to store all of our messages, and will initialize to be an empty list. So to do that, I'll come to the top of my class. I'll say a list of chat message. I'm going to call these messages, and I'm going to set that to be an empty list, like so. And then that's pretty much it. Then I can come to the bottom, make sure that I've set messages to messages, and now we are actually ready to implement the chat logic. So to implement the chat logic, it's going to work as follows. When the user comes, they're now being displayed with the power of dash chat in input field. They can input any kind of text within this field. So, hey, how's it going? And as soon as they press the send button, what's basically going to happen is that onSend is going to call, which is basically going to call our send message function, and we'll get this chat message object passed to us, which will contain all of the information regarding the chat message. So the first thing that I'll do is that I'll take the actual message that we receive and then add that to the actual messages list so that it's displayed on the actual chat UI. So to do that, it'll be fairly simple. All we have to do is basically call setState. And I'm going to say that the messages list is now going to be equal to the chat message that we've just received. And then I'll say ... messages, like so, and do command save. And for those of you that are confused with what this ... syntax mean, it basically is called the spread operator. And what it's going to do is that it's going to take the messages list, and it's going to basically take all of the elements from that list and add that to this new list that we've added here. So that's basically what it's doing. So now that this is done, the next thing that we need to do is basically take this chat message that we've received, pass it on to Gemini, let Gemini do all of the things that it needs to do, and then whenever we get a response from Gemini, show that to the user. So how are we going to be doing that? Well, firstly, I'll implement a try-catch block just to make sure that if for some reason we get some kind of an exception or an error, that our application is not going to crash. And in the catch block, I'll just say that print the error. Once that is done, the next thing that I'm going to do is create a string that is going to be our question. And this is basically the question that the user asks. And I'm going to set this equal to our chat message.text, like so. Now that this is done, the next thing that I'm going to be doing is basically taking this question and passing that to Gemini. Well, to do that, firstly, I need to create a variable that will store a reference to our Gemini instance. So to do that, I'll come to the top of my class, and here I'm going to say that I'll have a final Gemini variable. It's going to be set equal to Gemini.instance, like so. And that's pretty much all we had to do. And make sure that you import the Gemini class from Flutter_Gemini and do command save. And now we have access to our Gemini instance. So I can come at the very bottom, and now we can start working with this Gemini instance. So I'm going to do Gemini dot, and then on the Gemini instance, I'm going to have a function that I can call that's going to allow me to stream the response from the Gemini API. And that's going to be called stream generate content. And there are many other functions that you can call on this instance, such as stream chat, and there are other ones as well, such as just chat, but we're going to be using stream generate content. And then for the text here, I'm going to pass the question. And then what I'll basically do is that I'll attach a listener to this stream, and this listener is basically going to be fired every time an event happens on this stream. So what now we have to do is basically two things. Since when we pass our question to Gemini, it'll start generating a response for us. And then we'll get the response in various different events. So as soon as it generates a little bit of the response, we'll get that. Then when it generates a bit more of it, we'll get that. So what we need to do is keep adding the responses that we get from the API to the last message that's within the chat, because that's the message that's going to be from the Gemini API. Well, to do this, what I'll do is that I'll say that we're going to have a chat message, optional variable, and it's going to be called the last message in the chat. And then we'll do the following. I'll do that we'll take the messages list and we'll get the first element from it. And if we don't have it, then we'll return null. Then I'll try to check and see if the last message is from Gemini. Because if the last message is from Gemini, then I'll just add the response that Gemini gives me to this message. Otherwise, if the last message was from the user, then that basically means that I need to create a new chat message and add that to the actual chat UI. So then we can do last message is not equals to null. And then one other thing that I'd like to do is make sure that the last message is from Gemini. So to do that, I'll do last message dot user, like so, is equals to Gemini user. And then we can open up the if block. Otherwise, if this is not the case, then we'll do the following. Then we'll just create a new chat message, call it message, set it equal to a new instance of chat message. For the user, say that it's going to be our Gemini user. For created at, what I'm going to do is date time dot now. And finally, for the actual text, I'm going to do the following. I'll take the actual events that we get and extract the content from it, take all of the parts and combine them into a single string. So how can I do that? Well, to do this, what I'll do is that I'll create a string variable, and I'm going to call that response, and I'm going to set that equal to the event that we get. And then on the event, I basically want to access the content. Then on the content, I want to access all of the parts, so the different parts that combine together to make up the content. And then I want to basically combine all of these parts together into a single string. So I can do that by using the fold function. It's going to take an initial value, which is going to be an empty string. And then we're basically going to have the previous value and the current value that we need to add to our previous value. And here I'm just going to return a string, which basically takes the previous value and concatenates with it the current value, like so. And that's pretty much all we had to do. And in the case that contents is null, then by default, what we'll do is just return an empty string, like so. And that's pretty much all we had to do. And I'll also add a nullifier access operator here. And then we'll take our response and we'll set that to be the message here, like so, and do command save. And now that this is done, what we can do is actually just call setState and add this message to the messages list so that it's displayed to the user. So to do that, it's basically going to be simple. All I'll do is set state, and here I'm going to do messages is equals to the new message that we've just created, added to the start of the list, and then the remaining messages that were already in the messages list, and do command save. So now with this done, let's actually take a look at the logic and how it's working, and then I'll show you where the problem is and how we can fix it, because for now we'll just get a part of the response, not the complete response. So let's restart our application. Let's write a message. Hey, how are you? Like so. And if I send this message, you are going to see that a response should be generated, but it's not showing me the complete response. And the reason for that is because as soon as the first event is provided to us, because again, we're listening to a stream, we're going to check to see the last message. We're going to have a last message, but the last message that we're going to have is not going to be from the Gemini user, it's going to be from our current user. So then it's going to come to this else block, it's going to create a new message, add the response that we get from Gemini to it, and then set the state here. But what I want to do in the case that the last message is from Gemini, then what I want to do is just update that message with the new response that we've gotten. So how can we do that? Let's take a look at it. So this is going to be in the first if block, where if the last message is not null and the last message user is the Gemini user, then we just want to append the new event text that we get to the message. So to do that, it's going to be the following. The actual logic for generating the response will still be the same. So let's just copy that and paste this here. So basically looping over the event.contents parts and then just combining them into a single string. And then after that is done, what I need to do is get access to my last message. So how can I do that? Well, to do that, I'll say that the last message is going to be equal to our messages list. And then from there, I'm going to do remove element at the 0th index. So that's the lastmost message. So the first message in our actual list of messages is going to be the message that was the most recent one that's displayed at the very bottom. So that's why we're removing that message from the 0th index. So it's going to remove that message and put that into our last message variable. And then what I can do is the following. I can just say that the last message dot text is now going to be equal to the new response that we've just created. And then what I'm going to do is call set state. And this time I'm going to say that the messages are going to be equal to a list where we're going to set the last message as the first element in the list, and then the remaining elements after that, like so. And that's pretty much all we had to do. And I can add an exclamation mark here as well, since I know that last message is not going to be empty. So this should pretty much fix the issue for us. And now if I restart the application and I write a message here like, hey, how's it going? And send the actual message, you're going to see that as soon as we get a response, it starts to send me that information. One weird issue that you can see in the actual responses that we're getting is that instead of just getting the text, we're getting a textual representation of the list, that is the parts list. So how can we fix that? Well, to fix this, what we'll do is basically come to the event.contents.parts.fold function, and then here where we'll concatenating the previous value with the current value, and here we'll do $previous, so we'll keep the previous value like it is, but for the current one we'll do current dot text, I believe, and then do command save. That's pretty much all we had to do. So let's copy this logic, paste it here as well, and do command save, restart our application. And now I'm going to say, hey, how's it going? And now if I send the message, the response we should get is provide information and assist users to the best of my ability. And then what I can do is also add a space here, since I can see that the space isn't being added automatically. So let me just do that, do command save, and then I can say, how can I learn Flutter? And if I send this query, hopefully there should be a more detailed response. And now I can see another issue, and this issue is that when we get a new part of the response given to us, then we're completely overriding the existing content that was within our last message. So the fix to this should be, if I come to if the last message is not null and the last message is from our Gemini user, Then we get our last message, we generate our response, we set the last message.text to, oh, it needs to be plus equal response. So we basically add the new response that we get to the previous content that was already within the last message's text. So let's do this, let's restart our application. And now if I do, how do I learn Flutter? Question mark, send it. It's basically going to give me a streaming response. There we go. So now we're getting a streaming response. It's not overwriting any of the information, and it looks great. So now what I'd like to do is basically implement the functionality of sending an image to the actual Gemini API and then ask it questions regarding that. So I'll show you how to do that now. So to do that, what we'll be doing is firstly adding the functionality of picking an image from the gallery. So to do that, I'll come to my -chat object. On this, I'm basically going to define the input options. It's going to be of type input options. And then I'm going to define the actual, I believe, trailing list on this. It's going to be a list of widgets. I'll say that we're going to have just one widget, which is going to be an icon button. When this icon button gets pressed, we are going to do nothing for now. And the icon here is going to be icons.image, like so. And I also want to make sure that I put this within an icon widget. So let's do that by doing icons.image. Then I'll Shift F, Command Save. There we go. We can actually see the icon image being shown to us. So let's click on this and let's see that nothing happens for now. So now within onPressed, what I like to do is basically call a function called send media message. So to do that, it's going to be the following. I'll create a new function at the bottom of my class. I'll call it send media message. And then I'm going to say that it's going to be an async function and it's going to take no parameters. I'll create a reference to our image picker. And this class is going to come from our image picker package. And then I'll instantiate a new instance of image picker. Once this is done, I'll say that we'll get an xfile optional variable, which is going to be file. It's going to be equal to await picker.pick image. And then the source here is going to be image source. And then I can do gallery. So basically pick an image from our gallery. With this done, we can actually test the code. So let's click here and it should open the gallery for us. And it's not opening it because we haven't set the send message button to be called. So let's come to the top. Icon button, when onPressed is called, we'll call our send media message function like so. Command save, click on this. It should open up the actual gallery for me. I can select an image and nothing happens for now. So now that we have access to our image, the next thing that I can do is basically construct a chat message. So to do that, I'll do if the file is not equals to null, then what we can do is say that we're going to have a chat message. And this is basically going to be the chat message that the user sends. So I'm going to call this chat message equals to, and I'll here create a new instance of chat message. The user will be our current user. The created at is going to be datetime.now, like so. Then the text is going to be, and I will say that whenever I give an image, the question that I'm asking on that image is the following, which is describe this picture, let's just say. So describe this picture, like so. And then once this is done, I'll also set the media's property on this. So this is basically going to define the actual media files that we've attached to our message. So it's going to be a list, and I'm going to add a chat media object to it. And the URL here is going to be the file's path. The file name can be empty. And then the type here is going to be image, like so. And that's pretty much all we had to do. And now that we've constructed our chat message, we can actually send that to the send message function, and then the rest of the logic can be handled there. So once we have created our chat message, then I can do _send message, like so. And here I can pass the chat message, and that's pretty much all we had to do. So now what basically is going to happen, that when send message is going to be called, we'll basically get a chat message. What we'll try to now check is if our chat message contains any kind of media attachments within it. If it does, that basically means that we need to pass that file along with the actual question that we get, which is going to be extracted from chatmessage.text, and then send that to the Gemini API. So to do this, it's going to be fairly simple. The first thing that I'm going to do is basically check to see if the chat message that we get, its media's list is not empty. And if this is going to be null, then by default, we'll return false. So if this is the case, that basically means that an image or some media file was attached. So what I'll do is basically create now a list of uint8, and it's going to be optional, and it'll be images like so. And then within the if block, I'm going to do images is equals to a list, which is going to have one element within it, which will be file, and it's going to be the chat message dot, and then I will access the medias list dot first dot, and here's going to be the URL. And here I'm going to do read as byte sync like so. And that's pretty much all we had to do. So what I'm basically doing is constructing a file instance from the URL of the first element that is within the medias list of our chat message. And then I'm reading that as byte sync, so that returns to me a uint8 list. And then that's basically going to be the only element within our images list, since we can pass multiple images if we'd like. Then I can come to Gemini.stream generate content. And then besides sending the question, I'll say that we'll send the images, and the images property is going to be optional. So if we don't send any images, then it's just not going to consider them. And then I'll here set it to images list that we've defined. And that's pretty much all we had to do, and do command save. So that's pretty much all we had to do. So now we can test if our application works as intended. So to do that, I'll restart my application. Firstly, I'll just write a generic question. So I'm going to do, hey, how's it going? And then send the actual question. And hopefully we should get some kind of a response. I'm doing well, thank you for asking. How are you doing? And then I am going to send basically a picture message. So let's try with this picture first. It's a picture of Henry Cavill. Let's see what the Gemini API tells us. There we go. It correctly identifies the person in the picture to be Henry Cavill. He is an actor who has starred in movies such as Man of Steel and The Witcher. So that's great. Let's try another image. So we could try this image, and hopefully it should be able to correctly detect and tell us what the actual content of the image is. So there we have it. It says that the picture shows a beautiful harbor in Monaco. And what final test we could do is say, what day is it today? Send it. And it doesn't tell me anything. And that's exactly the kind of response I expected, because it can't provide any type of real-time information. Just wanted to let you guys know that, since its knowledge was cut off in April 2023. So the most it knows about the world events is up to the events that happened within April 2023. So with that, that's pretty much it for today's tutorial. I hope that you enjoyed and learned a thing or two about how to create these powerful AI chat applications using the power of Flutter and the Gemini API. As always, if you enjoyed the video, then please don't forget to leave a like on the video and subscribe to my channel so that you get notified every time I release a new video. And stay happy, stay healthy, keep learning, keep growing, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.